Baptist layman named William Miller. He was certain from his studies of the Bible that Jesus Christ was going to return that day. The return date had arrived. The waiting crowds gathered at various places, mainly throughout the Northeast, peered expectantly upward as the hours slipped away. Anxiety grew as nightfall descended. Then the midnight hour tolled. People became more restless through the wee hours of darkness. The dejected, stunned crowds began to disperse. Daylight, October 23rd, no return. This dashed hope came to be known as the Great Disappointment. Paul Boyer talks about the deep despondency suffered by these Millerites. One disappointed believer, our fondest hopes and expectations were blasted. A spirit of weeping came over us as I never experienced before. We wept and wept until the day dawned. Many, next paragraph, threw off their faith completely. Some refused to give up their hope and eventually replace one delusion with another. They would later claim maybe that Christ had came invisibly in 1844. Moving into the Holy of Holies in heaven. That's what his return was. Yeah, he didn't come physically. He came into the Holy of Holies in heaven. That was the return. We just misunderstood it. And he began to perform investigative judgment of Christians' lives. Many returned to the churches out of which they come, confused, distraught, embarrassed. Miller renounced his prophecy studies after the Great Disappointment. And he died 5 years later. Any remaining followers of his split up over differences of belief and doctrine, and the ultimate result, two groups that stemmed from this, were the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists. And Miller, actually 1844 was a year earlier, he had predicted the return of Christ, but adjusted it. Famous for date setters to do. And great disappointment happened when John Clough was 8 years old. And it really disillusioned a lot of people in New York, and particularly that area where he was so prominent. As a teenager then, Clough ends up in Illinois, and he laughs at the uneducated people in the meeting. He ends up at Burlington College in Iowa and is a roommate with a man whose last name was McMichael, who was an earnest Christian. He prayed for his roommate's conversion. So in Iowa, in a Baptist church, John Clough begins to attend a Sunday school class, and the pastor of that church is Pastor Johnson. Pastor Johnson visited his young Sunday school attendee, John Clough, and there on that visit, he led him to Christ. And February 11th, 1858, Clough was baptized into the membership of the First Baptist Church of Burlington, Iowa. Then Clough's family moved to Illinois, there near him in the mid-1840s. Then they moved to northern Iowa, where they lived on a huge parcel of land. And Clough begins to work in surveying job. He begins to be a surveyor. And he goes up to Minnesota and other states in the upper Midwest surveying. He was good at it. At the age of 20, he became a chief surveyor. And after his conversion here, Clough becomes a faithful layman working in the church. And the church here is a church that was filled with missionary zeal. In fact, the pulpit of the church that he went to, the front of the pulpit, had a map of missions, map of the world on it, and they would talk about the different places around the world that needed missionaries. And once a month, the pastor preached a missions message. So it's all the time before his eyes. A missionary by the name of Osgood visits the church, and Clough commits at that service to foreign missions after his message. He was assuming that he was going to be fighting in the Civil War and waited. His draft number never was called. So in 1861, he marries a Miss Sunderland, and he graduates from college 1862. 1862, hindrances to missions that he faced. One was the Civil War. It was kind of like we've got a lot to occupy our time and our money in America. Missions was put on the back burner. There was a great temptation to materialism. He'd already become good at surveying. He had a trade. He had a family that he needed to support. And so the temptation to just settling in and taking that good paying job was a big temptation for him. Materialism and his trade that he'd already mastered. He went to work as a coal porter, a bookseller, a door-to-door bookseller, religious books, Bibles, and other books. And it was a big thing back then for people to do this, the door-to-door book salesman. And what that did is that got him in communities, and it got him in a face-to-face conversation throughout the course of the day with many people. We'll learn about later on another man who was a coal porter who turned that into really a lifetime of evangelism. He never was ordained, but he turned this coal porter and this door-to-door book Bible salesman. After he offered his sales for his books, he witnessed. So that's what here John Clough was involved with. He did that for a couple years. And in 1864, the Triennial Convention, now I guess this is going to be, would be meeting by now. The Southern Baptist Convention has broken off about 19 years before that. So this is just a group of churches, more Northern Baptist churches. They meet in 1864. And at the meeting, a missionary by the name of Jewett, Jewett, talked about a tremendous need that he had for an assistant in India. Clough was approved for missions work, and he surrendered to it to go to India with this missionary by the name of Jewett, who just had a huge need. And Clough's friends literally thought that he was insane, and they told him that. They pointed out his family, they pointed out his work, how he could be effective here in the States. On his way back to, I guess it would have been Iowa, from the Triennial Convention, which was in Boston, he stopped off in Chicago. And there he met a preacher by the name of Culver, who told him this: "You are invincible is not the right. Basically, you are invincible until your work for the Lord is done." In other words, God is going to protect you until your work is done. Don't worry about the criticism. Don't worry about the dangers. God's going to take care of you. This man, missionary by the name of Jewett himself, got the title the Savior of the Telugu mission. The Telugu is spelled there for you on the sheet. There, I think, under the picture of John Clough. What happened was this. Several times in the last decade, the Mission Board in America was going to just shut down this mission work in India to the Telugus. It had really declined a lot. And that's why this missionary Jewett came to the Triennial Convention and just pled. He said, please give me one more shot at this. I just need it. If I can get a worker, a man who sold out, I think we can turn this thing back around. And they knew the work that was going to be. So it's kind of like the idea that they sent Jewett and Clough over just with one more shot at it. And see what happens, and if something doesn't happen, we don't want to just waste our money over there. So that they were under the gun. They were under great pressure to see what they could get done here. And so Clough, the first thing that he did, he gets there in 1865, and he sets his heart and his mind to language study. And the first thing that he learned was how to say John 3:16. And so he would say that, and they would hand a tract out to everybody that he could possibly meet. He would quote John 3:16 and give him a tract. He wanted to get going right away, spreading the gospel as quickly as he could. That year, December 1865, he saw his first convert come to know the Lord, saved and baptized. Then in September 1866, he gets to a kind of a permanent mission station at Angole, Angole, all stemming from this Telugu mission center. And by January 1867, they've organized several converts into a Baptist church. And after 1 year, the number in this church was 75. 1 year of working. And then Clough had to come face to face with a social issue that became a spiritual issue. And the social issue that he had to face was the issue of the caste system in India. You've heard about the caste system and how that works. And so in the area where he was at, there was a group of people called the Madigas. And I looked them up, and the internet calls them a scheduled caste. I didn't know what that meant. So under the explanation of scheduled caste, they describe that this is a caste, group of people that are historically disadvantaged. And I guess that's probably an understatement. The teacher that I had when he was explaining the Madigas to me, he termed them this: the outcasts of the outcasts, right? In the caste system, there were outcasts, like, they're so low. The Madigas are described as the outcasts of the outcasts, yet they were within reachable distance of his church that he had built up, can you imagine, through the prayer and the work and the language study, up to 75. Nice church established there. And so he comes in contact with the Madigas. They want to come. They want to hear how to be saved. He accepts them into their church, into the church. He's willing to baptize them and let them join the church. The result, the caste system is deeply ingrained in the culture, certainly at this time, still today, but definitely at this time. So when they came in, others left. So the caste system in these new believers was more important than the cross. But they had to face repercussions from their work and their home too if they broke caste. So there was a great conflict that he faced. And so in the end, for the rest of his life, John Clough was ministering among the Madigas, the outcasts of the outcasts. He stuck with it, and by 1872, in the membership, there were 1,500 Telugu Madigas that were members of the church there. That year, he returns to the States, preaches in churches, addresses the Triennial Convention, and raises $100,000 to build a seminary to the Telugus in India. And while he's gone, those over 2,000 converts were baptized that day. Christmas, 1876. 3,000 people gathered together around his missions compound wanting to be baptized. He came out and addressed them and said no. And the reason was because at this time, India was in a horrible famine. And Clough had discerned or thought that the reason why they wanted to be baptized was to get the food, just to get the food that his mission could supply and would supply on a permanent basis, trying to help. This is a horrible famine. I have down 3 million people died through this famine, so it was widespread. He wanted to test them and watch and make sure that they wanted to join the church after they had a personal salvation experience, and not because they were just going to get food and their physical needs met. I wanted to be careful. And he said this, it might sound harsh: come back when the famine is done, and we'll talk about you getting baptized and joining the church. Undoubtedly, he would share the gospel with them, but the baptism, which would make them members of the church, he wanted to watch and test them about that. So for 15 months, no one was baptized. When the famine was done, after 3 days, over 3,000 were baptized. All told, in 400 villages, and again, this is a village-wide, 400 villages where the mission, by this time, workers are coming and nationals are training. You got a picture there of, his first, what does that say? The first ordained pastor. He's ordaining nationals to spread this work. So all told, in the 400 villages, there were 12,840 members in the churches. Of that 12,000, 7,000 were dismissed from membership in order to go out and form indigenous churches. 24 pastors were ordained, and with them they took a total of 7,000 members to so hear this, and to push the mission further out, these men are ordained, and with their own, with some members went out and started other pioneer missions works. In 1883, he goes home for a brief second furlough, comes back, and his third term on the mission field is 1884 to 1891. He gets his missions funds cut. He's short on money. He urges the native churches to be self-supporting by necessity and wanted to see them be self-supporting financially. In 1891, he returns to the States, and through the student volunteer movement, 25 missionaries volunteered to come back and work with him at the Telugu mission. The mission board began to promote among students volunteer missions, short term, and so he goes back with 25 helpers, and obviously he's going to pray that they're going to turn from short term into long term missionaries. His wife gets sick on that return to the States, and she dies at home in Kalamazoo, just up here in Michigan. So Clough remarries. They face another famine near the end of the 1800s. In 1901, as he's riding his horse, he's thrown and breaks his hip and is severely hindered by that. Of course, by now he's born in 1836, and this is 1901. So he's getting up in years, and so they send him back to the States to recover his hip as well as his health. For us, broken hip now, okay, well, they go to the nice hospital and they do the nice, clean, neat surgery. And if there needs to be a hip replacement, you can get a hip replacement. But you think about, we're back it up here, 1901, what that would mean. When he's preparing to leave India, 2,000 natives gathered to see him off. And he stayed in the States for 18 months. And then went back to India for 2 more years, and his health was very poor, and returns and dies November 24th, 1910 in Rochester, New York. And all told, by the end of his life, the Telugu mission, because of the multiplication that took place because of the training of the national pastors and the willingness of having members go out and help those, all told, at the time of John Clough's death, there were 60,000 members in the churches associated with Clough's mission, and that is just less than 50 years after a Mr. Jewett came to the Trident Convention and said, "Can you give me one more shot? If I can just get somebody that's fervent, and if I can get a guy that'll be willing to stick with it, I think something can be done." And I would say something was done. They stuck with it, and it's a tremendous story reading about John Clough and the hurdles that he had to face, and the willingness to, as a pretty successful businessman, raised in a pretty uppity house and pretty influential house, to find his life invested among the outcasts of the outcasts, something that we don't even have a full concept here in our culture of this caste system. So John Clough, called the Apostle to the Telugus.